I'm Changpeng Huan from Shanghai Jiao University. I'm very pleased to be able to show my recent work on China as an imaginary threat. The reason for us to choose Australia then Australia constitutes an ideal case study of examining how a middle power that has been increasingly locked into China-US strategic competition responds to rising China. The existing studies have unnecessarily prioritized American perceptions of China over perspectives of middle powers, for example, Australia. As the figure on the left shows, that China is Australia's largest trading partner, and this has been the case since 2009. Yet the most recent opinion poll by Australia's Lloyd Institute has shown that there are more Australians view China as more of a security threat than economic partner. This situation has worsened in the wake of COVID-19. After the Trump administration has shifted from viewing China as a strategic partner to a strategic competitor, Australia is forced into an acute dilemma to choose between its history and geography, or between security and prosperity. In fact, the discourse of Changst or China-led angst in Australia has a long history and can be traced back to early 20th century when the White Australia policy was enacted. The most recent version has been particularly acute when Australia redefines its region as the Indo-Pacific in line with the United States Indo-Pacific strategy. China has been constructed ontologically and ideologically as a threat, and this anxiety is widely circulated in political and media discourse. Against this backdrop, we asked three questions. The first is then, what are China's images being constructed in Australia's mainstream print media from 2009, when China first became Australia's largest trading partner, to 2019, when China-Australian relations started to worsen. The second, what are the discursive strategies through which China has been constructed in Australian mainstream print media? And the last is then, what are the reasons underpinning Australians' media perceptions of China? To address these questions, we follow discourse-historical approach, starting from a survey of macro context of China-Australia bilateral relations, as well as the context of Australian news production, all the way down to detailed linguistic analysis. Following an innovative corpus method, we eventually selected 90 thematically loaded words and categorized them into 5 broad categories based on the topical meaning they convey: trade and economy, security, Australia's China policy, Indo-Pacific region, and others. The topic of trade and economy is particularly lexically rich. The most salient topos is that of China as a trade partner and opportunity for Australia. These topos allowed the Australian media to focus on the huge volume of China's economy and growing demands for Australian resources, China-Australian bilateral treaties, and China's investment in Australia. The importance of China's economy has long been recognized by the Australian government almost 10 years ago in the Asian Century White Paper. This white paper made it clear that in this century, the region in which we live will become home to most of the world's middle class. And the Australian media noticed that shifting from supplying resources to supplying China's growing middle class in the trade with China will present new export and investment opportunities for Australia beyond the traditional Australian perception of China, which is mainly about resources and energy. And this is also why the China-Australian Free Trade Agreement has been particularly salient. On the other hand, Australia's reliance on the rising China for economic prosperity has also been constructed as a potential threat through the topos of China as an economic threat to Australia. There is a growing fear among Australian media, evidenced in the salient topos of fear, that China may weaponize economic interdependence for strategic purposes. The topos of fear is also evident concerning security issues, and this is particularly evident in Australian media coverage of the South China Sea. This topos also enabled Australian media to show that China's military build-up in the South China Sea constituted a threat to free navigation, suggesting that South China Sea should be taken as international waters instead of China's maritime empire. As a non-claimant in the South China Sea, Australia is geographically far away enough to avoid being involved in the disputes or confrontations with China, and it thus has no business in enraging China or criticizing China's stance. The real reason, we guess, for Australia's active involvement in this area is of strategic nature. Australia's top 3 export markets, as can be shown on the left table, in order were China, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, occupying a solid majority of Australian total exports. So Australian media also acknowledged the large volume of two-way trades between Australia and its 3 largest trading partners passing through the disputed waters. The topos of China as military threat also enables Australian media to describe China as the world's second largest military spending country, a potential threat to destabilize the region by sparking an arms race. Yet the fact is that in 2019, the US military expenditure, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, surged 700 billion US dollars, well over double the second largest military spending country, that is China, and roughly equal to the total military expenditure of the next top 10 military spending countries combined. The argument that the world's second largest military spending country constitutes a threat to Australia, whereas the world's largest, the US, spending country stands as Australia's core ally, is at best a logical fallacy and at worst ideologically deceiving. In short, Australia is geographically located far away from the disputed waters in the South China Sea. As also stated in Australia's foreign policy white paper, the risk of direct military threat to Australia is low. Yet Australia has a large volume of trades sailing through the waters annually, and it is through its alliance with the US locked into the US-China strategic competition for influence in the region that can largely explain its stance. Our corpus findings have found that political consensus on the upcoming Asian century has been transformed into political consensus in the media as well. Yet the most salient topos regarding the Indo-Pacific affairs has been one of China as a challenge to the US hegemony. The topos allowed the topos of China as a rival to its neighboring powers is also noticeable, as serving to construct China as a troublemaker in the region. And this allowed Australian media to accept that the strategic competition between China and the US has driven Australia into an acute dilemma, largely because Australia is a middle power unable to influence the US-China relations, while the expansion of China's regional and global influence is gathering pace. This topos also enabled Australian media to argue for further reinforcement of a firmer alliance with the US in Australia's approach to the Indo-Pacific. Australia's weak political trust on China, especially through media reporting of its China policy on Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, and Taiwan, and also related to human rights issues. Now, our corpus findings have shown that China's image in Australia's mainstream print media over the last decades has primarily centered around trade, economy, politics, and military affairs, transcending the bilateral sphere into multilateral issues with a particular focus on the Indo-Pacific regional affairs. In parallel to China's economic opportunity, corpus findings have also illustrated an increasingly negative portrayal of China as an economic threat to Australia as well. The reason for such a bipolar attitude to economic engagement with China can be largely explained by its transactional economic base of China without any intention, sorry, this should be without any intention to further political trust. Despite that, corpus findings have recorded selling topoi of China as military and strategic threats. One speculation about the reasons behind the topos of China as a threat is what Bob Carr viewed as the shift of Australia's policy making away from the Department of Foreign Affairs toward DFAT towards the Defense and National Security Ministries. To conclude, the corpus-based study of China's national image in Australian mainstream print media carried out in this research bolsters empirical foundations of image studies, substantially reduces analyst bias, and enhances the credibility of analysis. The findings bear implications for a deeper understanding of current worsening China-Australian relations and perhaps also for foreign policy making. Thank you.